On January 2, 2000, on a cold morning like any other in Dearborn Heights, a suburb of Detroit, a male driver was crossing the bridge over the frozen Rouge River when he suddenly felt nauseous. He stopped his car, got out, and approached the bridge railing. As he leaned over to vomit, his eyes caught a horrifying sight in the icy water below, a naked female body floating. Police quickly arrived at the scene after receiving the emergency call. They were suspicious of the driver's story, but decided to let him go after taking blood samples and searching his house and vehicle. Investigators quickly ruled out the suicide theory. They believed the victim had been thrown from the bridge. The victim's hands were carefully wrapped in nylon, perhaps to preserve DNA evidence, if any. The next day, the autopsy results revealed a heartbreaking truth. The victim had been strangled to death and showed signs of sexual assault. Forensic experts carefully collected DNA samples from the victim's body to create a profile for comparison. Fingerprints revealed the victim's identity as Wendy Jordan, 39, a woman with a prior record of prostitution and drug use. The investigation quickly hit a dead end. Detroit was a place where many women involved in prostitution became victims of murderers. They were often not reported missing. Investigators placed their hopes on DNA matching results, but this process often took months. 3 months passed in anxiety and helplessness. Then suddenly, on April 10, 2000, horrifying news reached the authorities. Another murder had occurred near the railroad tracks, with the victim once again being a woman. Shortly after, 2 more decomposed female bodies were discovered in a nearby drain. All 3 victims showed signs of strangulation with rope, and their bodies were positioned in sexually suggestive poses. The investigation team quickly concluded these 4 murders were committed by a serial killer. Kate Termini, a forensic psychologist, noted that the fact the bodies were not hidden suggested the killer might want the police to find them. He seemed to be challenging the investigators, wanting to be caught. The commanding officer of the Detroit Police Department called the perpetrator a killing machine that needed to be apprehended immediately. The task force hunting the killer was maximized. The victims were identified one by one: Robin Brown, 20, Rosemary Felt, 32, and Kelly Hood, 34. All had prior records and fingerprints on file with the police. Near Kelly's body, investigators found a jacket. In its pocket were prescription drug bottles. From this lead, they traced a man with a history of violence. However, after passing a lie detector test, he was removed from the list of suspects. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit quickly joined the investigation. They developed a profile of the suspect, a white male, about 25 to 35 years old, seeking sexual gratification by strangling victims. Tracy Benjamin, a veteran investigator from the Los Angeles Police Department, suggested that the strangulation behavior was part of the killer's sexual dysfunction. While questioning local sex workers, the investigation team unexpectedly found important witnesses, survivors who had luckily escaped after being attacked. Among them, Devin Marcus, a 22-year-old, provided invaluable information. Devin recounted that on April 7th, she was approached by a white man with red hair driving a Jeep. He wore a name tag that said Eric and offered $40 for sex. He then took Devin to the railroad area and attempted to strangle her. Fortunately, Devin managed to break free and escape. Devin's testimony was corroborated by another survivor named Wilhelmina Drain. On April 2nd, a week before the bodies were found, Wilhelmina was also taken to the railroad area and attacked by a man. She fought back fiercely and managed to escape. Wilhelmina clearly remembered that the attacker had a tiger tattoo on his arm. This information was a crucial breakthrough in the investigation. Detectives quickly searched for men in the area matching the witnesses' descriptions. And then, they found John Eric Armstrong, a man living in the area where the crimes occurred, with an appearance and vehicle matching the survivors' testimonies. On April 12th, John Eric Armstrong was arrested. Faced with undeniable DNA evidence, he confessed to all his crimes. John said that when he killed Wendy Jordan, the first victim, he wasn't familiar with the railroad area yet, so he disposed of the body over the bridge railing into the Rouge River. When news of John Eric Armstrong's arrest was announced, the entire city of Detroit felt a weight lifted. However, the pain and loss he caused to the victims' families could never be erased. The investigation continued to search for more potential victims of John, hoping to bring justice to them and their families. The John Eric Armstrong case is a testament to the danger of serial killers and the importance of protecting vulnerable people in society. It also shows the crucial role of forensic science and cooperation between law enforcement agencies in solving crimes. Years after the case, the city of Detroit still couldn't forget the horror John Eric Armstrong had caused. His name became a symbol of evil and cruelty, a warning to everyone about the hidden dangers in society. Criminal psychology experts studied John Eric Armstrong's case thoroughly, trying to understand the motives and psychological development of a serial killer. They hoped that these insights would help prevent the emergence of similar killers in the future. For the sex worker community in Detroit, this case was a major shock. Many of them had lived in fear for months, not knowing if they might be the next victim. After the case, social organizations increased their efforts to protect and support this vulnerable group. In the years following John Eric Armstrong's arrest, the city of Detroit gradually recovered from the terrible nightmare. However, the scar he left on the souls of the people here has not faded. Families came together, forming a support group to overcome the pain of losing loved ones. They regularly organized memorial services, lit candles for the souls of the deceased, and shared beautiful memories of them. Meanwhile, John Eric Armstrong faced the justice system. His trial attracted national attention. Hundreds of reporters flocked to Detroit to cover the case. John's image, with his bright red hair and cold eyes, appeared on the front pages of most major newspapers. The public followed every development of the trial with extreme tension. Throughout the trial, John remained cold and emotionless. He showed no remorse for his crimes. This further angered the public, who demanded an appropriate sentence. Defense lawyers tried to argue about John's mental state, but these efforts failed in the face of irrefutable evidence of his crimes. After weeks of tense trial, John Eric Armstrong was sentenced to life in prison without parole. When hearing the sentence, he maintained a cold expression, showing no emotion. Many in the courtroom applauded, while others burst into tears from emotion. Justice had finally been served. However, the story didn't end there. Investigators continued to search for more potential victims of John. They suspected that the actual number of victims could be much higher than what John had admitted. Forensic experts worked tirelessly, analyzing every DNA sample, every trace to uncover the truth. In prison, John Eric Armstrong became a subject of study for many criminal psychologists. They tried to understand the psychological development of a serial killer, hoping to prevent the emergence of similar individuals in the future. However, John remained silent, refusing to cooperate with interviews and psychological assessments. Meanwhile, in Detroit, life gradually returned to normal. However, the case left profound changes in the community. People became more vigilant, especially at night. Self-defense and community protection programs were widely organized. Many volunteered to join neighborhood patrol teams to protect high-risk areas. For the sex worker community, the John Eric Armstrong case was an expensive lesson. Many of them decided to abandon this dangerous profession. Social organizations increased efforts to support them in finding new jobs, while providing psychological counseling and healthcare services. The Detroit Police Department also underwent significant changes after the case. They enhanced training for investigators on criminal behavior analysis skills and handling missing persons cases. The process of receiving and handling missing person reports was improved, especially for those in high-risk groups. Finally, the John Eric Armstrong case left a deep mark in U.S. criminal history. It reminds us that in modern civilized society, there still exist monsters in human form, ready to commit horrific crimes, and only through vigilance, unity, and the relentless efforts of the entire community can we protect the vulnerable and ensure justice is served.